In 1776, the American colonies were fighting for their very survival. Large armed forces from the British Empire had landed in Boston and New York, and a massive naval siege was slowly suffocating the continent. Across the Atlantic, potential military allies watched the conflict play out, but they kept their distance. To the French and the rest of the watching world, this was merely an internal domestic dispute, a localized civil war between a king and his unruly subjects. 27 specific legal grievances against King George III were piling up and weighing down the colonies. At the center of the dispute were practical legal violations, taxes without representation, forced quartering of British soldiers, and the deprivation of trial by jury. A legal argument over tax policy and property rights makes for a compelling lawsuit, but a lawsuit cannot forge a new nation. Complaints about the local housing of troops offer no compelling reason for a foreign superpower to send soldiers and money across an ocean. The colonists realized their only sure path to freedom and immediate survival was absolute independence. They had to formally sever ties with Great Britain. The Continental Congress faced a severe strategic problem. They needed to present a philosophical justification for their rebellion that elevated a political dispute over taxes into a universal moral imperative. This was a harsh diplomatic reality. The only way to convince a superpower like France to intervene with heavy financial and military aid was to appeal to broader principles of humanity. They needed a document that explicitly reframed the conflict. The argument had to move away from the specific statutes of British law and root itself in a global battle for human dignity. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. Written primarily by Thomas Jefferson, the text provided exactly the framing the colonies required. Rather than opening with a long list of King George's legal infractions, Jefferson structured the preamble to bypass British statutes entirely. This flowchart illustrates the new ideological foundation introduced in the text. Instead of operating under British law, the colonies based their independence on the laws of nature and of nature's God. By grounding the revolution in nature, the Congress sidestepped British legal authority. On the world stage, King George's rules became philosophically irrelevant. Jefferson anchored this approach with a single, powerful assertion. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. He followed this by stating that individuals are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Unalienable meaning they belong to the individual inherently and cannot be taken away or transferred by any government. This diagram outlines the three specific rights Jefferson explicitly named in the text: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Under the centuries-old monarchical system, rights were treated as conditional privileges granted by a ruler. Jefferson argued these rights are inherent from birth. Because power was recognized as originating from the Creator rather than the Crown, the document operated as a revolutionary manifesto rather than a simple secession petition. The universal framing of the Declaration immediately achieved the colony's primary diplomatic goal abroad. Foreign powers took notice. The French government, reviewing the document, was finally persuaded that the conflict was a definitive permanent break from Britain, rather than a temporary rebellion that might be smoothed over. Because of this newly defined independent status, a massive influx of foreign aid, weapons, and military support began flowing into the colonies. The deliberate philosophical wording of the text served a highly practical, life-saving military function. It effectively ended the colony's geopolitical isolation and provided the resources necessary to fight a war. Signing this document carried severe personal stakes. It was an act of high treason against the British Crown, which is why the signers concluded by pledging to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. The document provided immediate military utility, but its survival extended long after the Revolutionary War was won. The self-evident truths and natural rights outlined by Jefferson transitioned from a wartime justification into the permanent ideological cornerstone of the new American Republic. The Declaration's ultimate historical legacy is its dual success. It secured the immediate survival of the nation while establishing a timeless, universal standard for human liberty.